Hello, everybody. Welcome to Medicine and Science on the Pod TV network. I'm Nick Palavita. I will not be your host today, but I will be a moderator because today we have a very important host, a person who knows a lot about medicine, which is not a lawyer, which I am. Instead, it's a doctor. And we're going to have Dr. Patmos, who's a board certified in internal medicine and also has a specialty in infectious diseases, which we're going to talk about one today, which is COVID, especially long COVID. As the anti-vaxxers ramp up saying, hey, please don't take the vaccination, and then people get COVID, it's not a good thing because all of a sudden they get long COVID, which is also not a good thing. And I think there's some studies out already saying if you had taken the vaccine, your likelihood of getting long COVID is not as good. But we need somebody who can interpret the study, a subject matter expert who is board certified in internal medicine. Please don't listen to hacks and quacks. And that's Dr. Michael Patmos. Dr. Michael Patmos, people have got to listen to what's going on with this long COVID thing. It's something when I read, it's like a living death, something I'm really not interested in having. But the anti-vaxxers apparently seem to have no problem getting long COVID. I guess they enjoy a long and painful life, but that's not for me. So what are your thoughts about this long COVID?
Well, good morning, Nick. Good morning to all the viewers. Thank you again for the privilege of joining you. I am a board-certified internal medicine physician with added qualifications in infection control and hospital epidemiology. Infectious diseases has always been my passion. So what is long COVID? Well, long COVID is a syndrome that has been observed in patients who have had COVID. And it appears to be pretty common. About 5 to 8% roughly of patients who've had COVID seem to have persisting symptoms. And these symptoms can last at least 3 months or longer. Some appear never to clear these symptoms. The symptoms and signs of long COVID are very nonspecific and generalized, and they include neurocognitive impairment and other fatigue, exhaustion, and so forth. This may sound familiar to you because it turns out that there are other patients who have similar symptoms following other viral infections. So what long COVID appears to be is a post-viral chronic inflammatory state that leaves the patient sick for a long period of time. And there's the recognition that this syndrome exists is pretty recent. And as a result, there's been intense interest in it. And a lot of investigators have been up until now digging into this to try to understand what it is, why it happens, and what we can do about it. There is no effective treatment for long COVID. They're trying all sorts of things, but there is no known effective treatment. The only thing you can do is to prevent long COVID is not get COVID. And the best way you can do that is by being vaccinated. And again, there is data, as you mentioned, that patients who are vaccinated against COVID are not only much less likely to get COVID, especially serious infections with COVID or life-threatening infections or die, but they're also less likely to develop long COVID. There's a very passionate group of people who are actively advocating now for research into long COVID to try to understand it. Well, why is this important? Well, it's important because one of the early mistakes that was made with COVID by Dr. Bhattacharya in the Great Barrington Declaration is this assumption that COVID is just an acute viral illness, like the common cold. You get this virus, you get acutely sick for a few weeks, and then it goes away. That's true for rhinovirus infections and other viral infections too, but not all. Some viruses will give you an acute infection that turns into a chronic infection or a lingering syndrome. Let me give you examples of this. So we know about chronic fatigue syndrome, which seems to follow other viral infections. That's been known for decades and been the subject of intense study. Subacute sclerosing panencephalitis is a chronic consequence of infection with measles. So we certainly have examples of that. Hepatitis B and C are well known to produce chronic infections with chronic sequelae that span all of medicine. All sorts of various immunological abnormalities result from chronic infections with hepatitis B, and C. And there are many, many, many more examples. So the point is, thinking that COVID was an acute thing that you get and goes away, as was based, as the Great Barrington Declaration was based on, that is not correct. Some patients, at least 5 to 8%, and probably more, develop long-term problems because of COVID. So we have to break this mindset that we're talking about an acute illness that goes away. It in many cases it does, in many cases it doesn't. Now, why is this all important? It's also important because just yesterday, all research into long COVID has been paused, not just paused, stopped. Under the Trump administration, the leadership of Health and Human Services, Robert Kennedy and his underlings have put a stop to all the research being done now on long COVID. And this is a tragedy, not only for those patients who suffer from persisting COVID symptoms, but for all of the other patients with persisting symptoms after viral infections, that we were starting to understand the mechanics and the mechanisms of these post-viral syndromes. That all now gets shoved aside because somebody in the Trump administration doesn't want you to know about long COVID. They want to keep that a secret. Well, I guess it's not a surprise when you consider that COVID in the United States, acute COVID, killed 1.2 million people, 300,000 to 400,000 of whom did not need to die had they been vaccinated, but they rejected vaccination. And so now we have not only this acute burden of death from COVID due to the Trump's policies, but now we also have long COVID, which is a result of failure to adequately vaccinate. So all of this is a direct reflection of the massive incompetence in health and managing infectious diseases within the Trump administration. So what we're really seeing here is the staggering, mind-boggling level of incompetence and lack of qualifications throughout the Trump administration, especially with regard to health and science. Just yesterday, Dr. Bhattacharya was confirmed as the head of the National Institutes of Health. The NIH, for those who may not be aware, is the world's largest and most respected biomedical research infrastructure. We lead the world, or we used to at least, lead the world in biomedical research. Dr. Bhattacharya is now in charge of the NIH, and he is wholly unqualified. He is a physician, but he never did an internship, residency, or fellowship. He has no training in biomedical research at all. He is an economist. So what we have is we have the CFO who's running a massive engineering enterprise. He's not trained in it. He can't distinguish one study from another. He doesn't have the training, but yet he's going to administer all of this now. His study, the Great Barrington Declaration, is a piece of junk. It's a 2-page thing. It doesn't even have any references or a bibliography. Let me ask you a question. You're in high school. Who writes a paper without references? Dr. J. Bhattacharya does. He apparently thinks that he can just expound on things without any references or bibliography, and it's all supposed to be accepted. Well, he's now running the show, as is Robert Kennedy, who's ultimately behind all of this. In addition to gutting research for long COVID, under Kennedy and Bhattacharya, now the NIH is gutting research in all sorts of things, cancer, many, many other areas. In fact, all the medical schools in the country and universities have NIH research grants. And this is how medical schools, part of their funding comes from their NIH research. And so stopping all this just hurts the medical schools. I just read yesterday that Meharry Medical College, a wonderful, historically Black medical school, just lost $30 million in funding. My alma mater, the University of Nevada School of Medicine in Reno, is going to lose several $1 million in research funding. Some of the bigger universities are going to lose tens of millions or maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. So across the board, what we're seeing is the gutting of medical research. Now, you talk about making America great again. Well, we were the world's leader in biomedical research. That and our entire capabilities for biomedical research are now being gutted as part of Doge and Kennedy's efforts. So, Kennedy ordered scientists at CDC who spent days following his orders to look for something that he could use to show that vaccines cause autism. And of course, these employees did what they were supposed to do. They scoured the literature and they can't find any evidence because there isn't any. So now what Kennedy's going to do is he put a guy in charge to conduct a study under the auspices of the CDC to look at the connection between autism and vaccines, which doesn't exist because there is no connection. And who did he put in charge of this study? A guy who's been convicted of practicing medicine without a license, who has just a bachelor's degree. That's it. In biochemistry, no training in any of these areas, not trained in infectious disease, not trained in epidemiology or research methods. This is now who's going to do the CDC study into a connection between autism and vaccines, an anti-vaxxer with no credentials. So what Kennedy's trying to do, obviously, here is he's trying to find something he can say that say, I was right. See, there's a connection. And then he could give that to his buddy Aaron Siri, who can file more class action lawsuits and make a lot of money. So this is where we are today. Here's our state of the art today. We've got long COVID, an important syndrome now being shelved to put on the back burner. All the other chronic viral syndromes shelved and put on the back burner, because what we have is across the board in the Trump administration, staggering levels of incompetence and lack of qualifications. Who would take a CFO, an economist, and put him in charge of an engineering enterprise? We got to have CFOs. God bless them. They're important, but they don't have the technical expertise to know how to do the engineering piece. See, they shouldn't be running the company. But
Dr. Patmos would be the same guy who put a news anchor in charge of the Secretary of Defense.
Yes.
Okay. Right. So you have to find somebody who's really not qualified, and then they can lead the country. What are your thoughts, Rick?
When we were kids, there was a product you'd order out of the back of comic books called itching powder, which was basically fiberglass fragments. You'd sprinkle it on your friends and it would irritate their skin. And COVID is like that. It's little particles. COVID is, as you said, a disease of inflammation and also of the circulatory system, because the virus rides your circulatory system. It's irritating, and it can land anywhere in your body, in the blood vessels, and create local inflammation and an overreaction on your body's part, which can cause any one of a number of issues, including in the brain. And I looked it up, and women are more, at least according to the studies, get long COVID more than men. And medicine has a history of poo-pooing, like chronic fatigue syndrome. I think more women get that. And then, they go to doctors and they say, I feel like crap. And the doctors say, it's all in your head. It's similar to Black people, Black women especially, their complaints don't get listened to. Because, and plus with COVID, there's a not so hidden agenda of denying how bad it is.
Yes.
Because the badness makes the Trump administration look bad. And estimates of the number of Americans with chronic long COVID range from 9 or 10 million on up to 50 million.
That's correct. So these folks are really functionally impaired. Many of them are collecting disability and unable to work and so forth. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Rick. That was a great comment. It's also important to point out that there's all of these autoimmune phenomenon, autoimmune diseases that we don't actually know the ultimate cause of, but they're thought to possibly be triggered by a prior viral infection. For example, multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis is believed and has been believed for decades to be something that is triggered by a prior viral syndrome. What the mechanism is, we don't know. Rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, a lot of autoimmune diseases seem to be triggered in susceptible people by some prior viral infection. So there may very well be a unifying concept that ties all of this together. And long COVID, was the sort of the trigger that's made us ask the question: are all of these things somehow related by a certain pathophysiologic mechanism, maybe the way such as you described, Rick? But now we won't know because the research into this has been gutted by someone who just has no clue what they're doing.
So we may find in the future that we have a permanently debilitated class of America. I'm writing a novel set in the 2030s. Like in the last 20 years, we've started showing in movies, in ads, we've added fat people to advertising because America is fat, and we're acknowledging that. And we've added Black people and Asian people and Latino people to advertising and to movies because they're part of the population. And also advertisers want to sell to those people. But in the future, I have what I call goopers popping up in movies and ads. These are debilitated people who they're still hot. If it's a beer ad, you'll have a bunch of hot people. One person, though, will just have a goopy face, even though they're in a bikini, because we're just going to be idiocracy with a bunch of sick people running around because we are inadequately addressed. We're sticking our heads in the sand.
Yes, definitely. I had a question for you based on something you brought up that is very dear and near to my heart and everything, because I actually have a family member that is dealing with that, and actually he sent out, I think I sent it to Nick, and I need to send it to you, Dr. Patmos, but my only brother, my younger brother, has a MS, and he has MS, and actually my aunt had it as well. So he's in the early stages of it, but he actually was sent out a Facebook post, a long post, about 20 minutes, that talked about how he doesn't like to think of himself as being defined by MS, but in some ways he is, because of him having to navigate when he's going to places and all along those lines, and trying to make sure that he's not inconveniencing people. Like one of the things he talked about was his fiance and her wanted to go to Louisiana, where I think she has some family at, but he didn't want to go there because he was afraid he would inconvenience her, and even going to her children's graduation, who he considers his stepchildren and everything like that, because he didn't want to inconvenience her. He actually wound up watching the graduation from the car and watching it online and everything like that. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, is MS a hereditary? And I don't know enough about it. I should, even though my brother had it. And like I said, he first learned about it from our aunt who had it, which is my mother's sister. And like I said, used to tease her, and even when she had it, and then it turned out he wound up getting it himself as well. So how much is MS a hereditary disease that maybe my nephews need to think about it in the near future as well, even though he's in the early stages?
Now, just in the spirit of true transparency, I am not a neurologist. I'm not an MS expert. But here's what I do recall, and as an internal medicine physician with infection control training, this is my understanding of it. It's been known for decades that the risk of multiple sclerosis depends on where you live. It's in higher prevalence in the middle latitudes, and lower prevalence as you move toward the poles. And that's fascinating, because as people move from higher latitudes or lower latitudes to middle latitudes, their risk increases. And the converse is also true. As people move away from middle latitudes to higher or lower latitudes in southern or northern hemisphere, their lifetime risk of MS declines. So it has been the belief since I was in medical school 50 years ago that the risk of multiple sclerosis it appears to be very regional, and it changes as you move from place to place. So it's behaving like it's tied to an infection. That's the perception. The belief is that there's probably some underlying virus or some other kind of critter, maybe a prion, that increases the risk of MS. To my knowledge, it's not an independently genetically transmitted disease. It's not a genetically transmitted, to the best of my knowledge. I will stand corrected if someone has more current information. As I said, I'm not an expert, I'm not a neurologist, but my understanding of it is that MS is, like many other autoimmune or disorders, seems to be triggered by an infection in genetically susceptible hosts. So there may be a genetic susceptibility
Right.
that is triggered by an infection if you happen to be in the right place where that infection is found. That, I think, is a pretty fair representation of our understanding of MS now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
There's another potential effect. Researchers annually assess, people's intellectual abilities, ability to read, ability to do math, and there's been a 10-year decline in this. There was a rather steep decline after COVID, but it didn't start there. And you can blame increased distractibility, social media, that nobody wants to sit down with a book. They've studied the number of people who've read a book or a short story in the past year, and that's declined like 20% in the past 5 years. And we know that some viruses, some infections, like the Spanish flu 100 years ago, affect the brain. And we know that COVID and long COVID can affect the brain. And just to get, to be a conspiracy nut, the Republicans are kind of, if you're looking at the political party that's anti-education and the party that has spent the last 50 years appealing to what they call low information voters because they're easier to wrangle, it's not unhelpful for the current political leaders for people to be stupider. And as I've said before, if you look at the 25 years after half of Earth got infected with Spanish flu, which can screw up your brain, those were a terrible 25 years filled with fascism, the rise of the KKK, a worldwide economic collapse, the Great Depression, and culminating in World War II. And if you go out today and and just watch people, there's a certain zombification where people are on their phones, and it's tempting to say that people are getting dumber, and this is supported by studies.
I think it's a fascinating thing you think about. I'm glad you're writing about this because you think about it. What if there was, a disease, an infection that produces stupidity, and this affected the world, and we made the world into a really stupid place? Maybe that's what is happening, because I am dumbfounded. I thought it was just the fact that we don't teach biology anymore, but I'm dumbfounded by the extent and the depth of scientific illiteracy that we see today, not just in the general public, but among our elected officials and representatives. Their level of understanding of science is mind-boggling. We really have become a stupid country, and it's just, that's not a good thing.
No, it's not good. Dr. Patton, is it required? Because it has to be required. About some of the past surgeon generals, but now I'm looking at some of these people that are being approved for jobs, not just RFK, but even like the NIHS and some of the other offices that don't really have a scientific background and everything. So what are we doing in terms of vetting people that are supposed to be in charge of medical organizations federally that are actually going to have some knowledge of the field? Because I think that you would be a great person for that. But
you have just asked the question of the day. Thank you so much for that astute question. I've been writing about this now for a long time. I talked about this when I first began doing podcasts with you all, a year ago. But I've been concerned about this and writing about this on LinkedIn for a long time. What we're seeing is the death of expertise. There was a time when, if you wanted to get an opinion from about a certain, you went to a specialist. If you want to know about cardiology, you ask a cardiologist. If you want to ask about cancer, you ask an oncologist. Somewhere along the line, this respect for expertise and credentials and education and training went away, at least as it affects medicine and science. We now have across the board all of the experts you see on Fox News, and you see on social media and in the government now and in the Trump administration. They don't have the credentials. These people would never have had the podium before. Now they have the podium, and it's kind of like credentials don't matter. We have entered an epoch now where if you say, gee, what are your credentials? You're accused of credentialism, of discriminating against people who don't have credentials. That's credentialism. And what we're seeing is the death of expertise. In fact, I think there is a book entitled The Death of Expertise that talks about this. It's a very serious problem. Everybody and anybody is now an expert. We're seeing people on TV all the time and social media all the time talking about medical topics with authority who do not have any training or background or education at all. Robert F. Kennedy is a perfect example. He has no training in health. What is he doing running Health and Human Services? There's so many examples of this, of people with inadequate training, inadequate credentials who are now getting away with being viewed as experts. And the real experts are now shunted to the side and marginalized.
It's like even the doctors TV show. How many of those doctors were actually doctors? I know the show, and I know we've even had a panelist here on our network because Barbara Smith was on that show. But I sometimes wondered whether they were all actual doctors or whether they were some that were Hollywood doctors, for lack of a better term.
Well, there are 1.1 million doctors in the U.S., and there could be more. We have a doctor shortage, but when you have 1 million of anybody, some of those people are going to be craven, incompetent, dishonest a-holes. And because it's 1 million people, and so what you're seeing in some instances are, doctors who are incompetent and or jerks and or super greedy. Like Malone, you keep talking about. Is a purveyor of bullshit, and like he's like on top of everything else, he's a climate change denier because he knows where his bread is buttered. That guy, I assume he has something to sell where he makes a lot of money, and he's going to keep appealing to the politics of those people.
Mm-hmm. There's hundreds of thousands of paid subscribers on Substack. I live in Maui, and he went on to say it was space lasers that started the fire on Maui. So I guess it sells on Substack. I don't know.
Yeah,
and among the rich, among certain segments of the rich, there's a new embrace of social Darwinism that in more peaceful times in America, people kind of pull together and we all do well when we all do well. But I think there's a certain bailing out of, like, if you've got $100 million or more, you're like, yeah, things are all screwed up and I'm going to let them be screwed up and I'm going to sequester myself behind security, in a gated community, and we're going to let things go to hell and we'll be fine.
That might be true, but I'll tell you that you can tell right now the leadership in Washington really sucks because the thing is, Congress, somebody should have just stood up against these crazy clowns that have no credentials at all. They're now leading our health, and watch what's going to happen. It will be bad, and there will be blood, but unfortunately, we're going to have to leave till next week, and then we'll discuss that later on. We'll see you next week on Medicine and Science on the Pod TV Network. Take care. Bye-bye.